welcome. So the topic tonight is about positivity and bypassing, or negativity and discernment. So this is a question that I get asked really often when people are trying to figure out how to be more discerning, how to be more clear in terms of the decisions that they're making. So positivity is focusing on what we want, like where we want things to go, what direction we're intending for things to go. So you could look at it as we're taking our focus and we're putting our focus in a particular direction to help to bring about some kind of a result. And bypassing is avoiding something that needs addressing. So we might be using a positive focus, so we want to go somewhere, but as a result of that, we are then creating sort of like a negative drag. So we're creating, or we're repressing, we're pushing aside something that is actually needing to be tended to. And as a result, it is sort of like it's growing. A pool of negative energy would be a way to say it, or that there is a growth of what it is that we are trying to avoid. Then it's not so much a matter that when we're being positive, like is the positive the bypassing or not, which is often the way that the question comes in, or am I just like avoiding something by this behavior or this way of approaching things, but instead it's a matter of what's happening in relationship to that positive focus. So is there something else that's happening in relationship to the positive focus that is going to create a future problem or lead to the creation of something else that is negative, if that is making sense? So basically, if we are pushing down something, I'm just going to use that particular direction to have it make sense, pushing down something in order to maintain our positive focus, and what we are pushing down is not getting worked with or worked out in some kind of a more positive way or like a cleaner way, then it will start to sort of create a problem that needs to be addressed. It sort of grows in its magnitude, and then that needs to be dealt with. So the positivity is the behaviors that are associated with the positive focusing are only become bypassing if there is a negative sort of byproduct that gets created that does not get to get resolved either through the process or through some other means. And so I like to talk about this in terms of like when we think about like clean energy, and we're trying to understand like, okay, how do we get the start to finish of clean energy to work when it comes to like a car or something, or homes. And so we have cleaner energy and less clean energy because it has more or less byproduct, negative byproduct that needs to be handled. And that is sort of the same thing with positivity and bypassing. So as long as we're maintaining a positive focus, we're looking in a particular direction, we're holding in a particular way, we're moving everything forward, and there is not this buildup, or the buildup again is being taken care of and resolved in some other way, then we're just simply using our positive focus to get more of what it is that we want. And we're cultivating a higher and higher vibration through doing that. And through cultivating that higher and higher vibration, we're able to bring ourselves into relationship with more and more positive things. So being positive is good. We don't want to shut it down out of the fear of not addressing something that is negative. So, but we want to be aware in the process. And so how do we stay aware? Because this is another piece of it, because sometimes people will say, oh, but do I lose my focus? Like, do I need to really make sure that I'm getting and I'm addressing that negative stuff? And it's like really through the process of becoming more sensitive and becoming more honest with ourselves, we actually grow in our capacity to notice the not so clean energy that is there, that's been being created at more and more subtle levels. We don't need to necessarily go hunting for it, because if we simply make the commitment to staying aware, it will eventually factor onto the screen. Now, you have to understand that at this point in time, I am talking about someone who is working on a different level than like just living with a lot of repression. And it's a different process. So at this point in time, like on this kind of level of things, someone is constructively working with positivity. They've cleaned out a lot of different stuff. They're wondering, am I at risk for spiritual bypassing, or for bypassing what it is that's going on? And I'm saying that as long as you help you do things to keep your awareness sharp, getting sharper and sharper, or better and better holding, would be two different ways of saying it, that material is actually going to come up to the surface. You will notice it. And so where that doesn't happen is when people engage in sort of things that bring their energy down further and further, and then they start to lose that ability to kind of see that clearly. Then usually a critical event happens, and at that critical event, the person is then at a choice point about whether they want to go, what direction that they want to go in, how they want to clean out what is built up. So I want to say a little bit about negativity and discernment. As far as negativity and discernment goes, one of the ways to think about discernment, it's like there's a kind of a critical thinking component to it. And when you think about critical thinking, a lot of times people think of like criticism, and they think about finding what's wrong with something. And, and so now you can sort of start to see this continuum between discernment and this critical being negative. And so it's like, how do you tell when you're simply making a call, like an assessment that's not helpful, that is helpful, versus just hammering on something that is like focusing on something that is just really negative and not helpful. And that also has to do with cleanliness of the call. So negativity, I would say, is something that sort of generates more negativity when you engage it. So it's like you start to have a critical thought, and then you add to it with other critical thoughts. Like that is the kind of like, that's the power of it, or that's the way that it works, is that it takes this kind of like initial negativity, and then it sort of keeps on generating more unless you catch it and stop it. Where discernment is like a sword. And so a discernment comes in and says like, yes, no, or like, this isn't a part of, like, it shouldn't be a part of this, So if you think about discernment and you're creating a work of art or something, you might be like, okay, but this doesn't actually fit aesthetically with what it's going on. It feels dissonant. There's like a clarity in that. It just doesn't belong as part of this, but there's not a charge around that, and the charge doesn't keep generating. Now, that's not saying that emotion is not a part of discernment at all. Emotion can help us discern. We can actually feel something, and as a result of that, make a discerning choice. But once the choice is made, the emotion of the should dissipate. The emotion is no longer necessary. So sort of you can see yourself on this continuum by the amount of negativity that gets generated or perpetuated through the action. Now, there are interesting categories or interesting combinations of this, because sometimes a person can be very discerning with one aspect of themselves, but then sort of have a negative track with another part of themselves. So they make a clear judgment call, but then have a lot of kind of process that's in there, negative process that's in there in relationship to the discernment, the discerning choice, or if that's the way to say it. So that's something that's interesting to observe, and sometimes gets confusing for people, how it's like, okay, I felt like that was really clear, but now I have this sort of negative process that's going on in relationship to the clarity that I had. And what can I do about that? Well, what you can do about it is sort of recognizing, going back to positivity, it's where are you focusing yourself, and are you able to focus yourself without creating that sort of negative undertone, right? So I went in the direction of discernment, but as a result of it, I'm having a negative process. I now bring my attention in the direction of where I want it to focus, and I pay attention to whether or not there is still a buildup that's going on, right? So sometimes you can just step out of your negative patterning, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to kind of go and attend to what that negativity is. So that is where I'm going to leave things off for now. A little bit of an introduction to these kind of continuums or ways of assessing. And I'll open things up and see if you have any questions about this particular topic. You're welcome, of course. And or also anything related to your spiritual development. So if there's anything else you'd like to bring to the table that you've been thinking of, you're welcome to bring that as well. And so where this kind of comes up again, right? Like, so what's the sort of the theme that's here from what I started, is that there's an emphasis on a certain type of perception, belief, orientation, thing I should and shouldn't do, however we want to categorize it. There's an emphasis on a certain way of focusing, that through that emphasis, there is the creation of sort of some byproduct. And the creation of that byproduct then creates like a bit of like, there's like confusion in the mix. And then there's a doubling down on the thing that was chosen for the focal point, and there's an increase in the confusion. And so the byproduct, and that just kind of keeps going. And that would be like a way of explaining how we get stuck in our process. And so what you're doing, like you're finding a way out of it essentially. But one of the ways out of it is to be able to step back a little bit and be able to perceive the whole situation more completely and less from that forced standpoint. So perspective helps. So when I ask questions produce perspective. The perspective allows for things to then be able to start to shift. And we're also able to do that with ourselves. So there's nothing wrong with the desire to be understood. That's actually a beautiful desire, right? But when it gets fixated on in a certain way, that it starts to create this negative sort of sidecar to it, that's when we have a problem. But then we think like, oh, I've got this problem with being understood or whatever it is, or control. But it's not, it's actually, it's like just the way we're going about it. That is the problem, not actually the thing itself. And so then we get to like, then by like stepping back from that, we start to create more clarity or more understanding, or be able to perceive more deeply into the situation. More questions or topic areas. So I'll close out with this then. very often when we're in some kind of a trouble spot, regardless of what it is that we're working with, whether it's discernment, positivity, acceptance, control, understanding, very often the reason that we are not able to sort of get results is because we are focused very narrowly on them looking a particular way at the exclusion of other very important elements, or at the exclusion of the good stuff itself being present. And so that narrowness of thinking doesn't produce change. It just grinds in on itself. And but it's a very ingrained habit that most people do for at least some time. So it's like we benefit from learning ways to step outside of that and counteract that. And it's a challenge inside of spiritual development, inside of personal development. It's a challenge to do that because the nature of the work brings us, like it encourages a focus on, or can encourage a focus on what the problems are. Back to the negativity discernment piece of things. But so like a desire to be able to solve whatever problem is, but it's a game. It's a game we can enjoy playing, but it's still a game. It's like create a problem, solve a problem, create a problem, solve a problem, and that has, like, again, it's like, it's a fascinating pastime, and a lot of interesting things get developed in the process. But the thing that helps, actually, and pretty much across the board, is that we stop that game and we start moving into a place of like greater perspective, and which includes a willingness to honor all that is present, right? So instead of denying or rejecting wants, needs, desires, and emotions, thoughts, feelings, and perspectives about things, and making certain ones right or wrong, we expand to a place where we're able to see the different elements just simply for what they are, and allow them to have their rightful place. Like, it's really just that we're messing with it, right? But everything kind of has its rightful place. And so once we start to do that, once we start to like shift out of the desire to maneuver everything and get it right and have the story and be positive, or whatever it is, and we start to just look at all the whole soup, allow everything to have its place, and then choose where we want to focus our energy, where we want to focus our attention. So I could focus my intention on how I'm controlling, or I could focus my attention on how someone's not understanding me, or I can focus my attention on who I'm being, what I want to be, where I'm going, whatever, there's a million different options of where you can focus your attention on, or what it is that you need, or honoring the self, or whatever. But you get the byproduct when you don't honor the completeness of the situation, when you're trying to exclude something from the scenario. And that exclusion brings up a discomfort inside. And that's kind of how you're doing it. So then you can shift to a broader perspective, a way of like taking in like all of what's happening in the situation, more of what's happening in the situation. And there are little tricks that we learn to kind of help open up that perception. Some of them you did when I was asking you questions, but they allow us to like look at something from a new angle, and that sort of like moves us back and like allows us to open up a little bit. And so we stop trying to force things as much. And every rotation that we do with that, we move into kind of a deeper and deeper level of like wholeness, completeness, so that as we do that, then when we're focusing our efforts in a certain way, we're doing it from a completely different ground. We're doing it from a place of like a greater, more full, more whole perception. And so the result is different. Not necessarily it's like we're still focusing, but we're not doing it with trying to get rid of some aspect of the experience. I say that we're still focusing, but we're not doing that by trying to get rid of some aspect of the experience. That's the part that doesn't feel good. That's the part that builds up the negative stuff, is we're trying to eliminate something from being. And that's sort of like, if we were to look at it based on what you were saying, Hannah, like that's like the very different definition of not understanding, you know? So we're trying to eliminate something from being a part of like where it belongs, what it is a part of. It doesn't necessarily need to be a part of it forever, but it is a part of it right now, you know? So that desire to eliminate creates like a kind of a pushback, or it creates a dissonance, or it creates a negativity inside of the system. When you accept it and then you choose, it creates a different dynamic. So you're moving into a place of acceptance, but kind of going back around to something that Jesse was sort of bringing up. You're going into a place of acceptance, but that doesn't mean you just accept, and you have no discernment, you have no focus, you have no direction. It just means that you are able to see as completely as possible, and then you're still choosing where you want to direct yourself inside of all of that. You don't need to make anything wrong or bad or not true in order to have your truth. And you don't need to do any of that stuff in order to have your focus. And there's a peacefulness that comes inside, like the more we realize that. And then situations arise where we're not able to hold on to that knowing. And those situations help us to grow in that way. Help us, if we work with them in a certain way, help us expand our ability to accept all that is and choose what it is that we want. And that kind of ripples out in a way that like sort of keeps on working over and over to create more of a truthful being, as well as less of that byproduct, more of like a totality. And that's the shift in consciousness, where first it feels like maneuvering, like, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it whatever? Like there's that. And then there's degrees of that. And then it starts to evolve into a place where both are true and neither are competing with each other. So there's the individual sense of self and there's the complete picture. And so cycling back to where we were having the conversation, rolling it back a little bit, like on the pathway there, you know, here is this conversation about positivity and focus and byproduct. And in that, it's like it's like you're starting to recognize the places through the byproduct, recognizes the places where you are forcing beyond your acceptance. So you're trying to work above your pay grade, you're forcing the issue, you're trying to make something happen beyond your ability to be with the situation. So you're doing over your being, and that creates that byproduct. And then as that happens and you work with it, it keeps moving into more and more acceptance, as well as a greater sense of clarity about where your focus is. And so then you can choose for yourself if you want to be in a very positive state, and you're doing that without creating that other stuff. And then when you do create that other stuff, you're like, oh, okay, you know, moving back to being able to see all of what's going on here. What is it that is being like denied? And what is a good way to acknowledge it? So it's an interesting layering too on the conversation about understanding and acceptance, you know, understanding from others, because it really is the practice. In a way, it's a practice of understanding. You know, it's like almost like the nature of it is sort of being explained in a different way than it usually winds up getting explained. So so the reminder here as we close up is just to feel the force of too much focus and a desire to make something happen, positivity, you know, the right outcome, to feel that in conjunction with the byproduct, to get a sense of whether or not it's clean and you're sort of in a place where you're accepting all parts of it. And then when you, if you can move yourself or work, sometimes you have to work, you know, get help or like do some work with yourself to shift to being able to see more of the situation. Big issues in our life can take years sometimes, but you know, you shift to being able to see more of it. And then it's just like, then naturally, like, again, you're going to focus, you're going to kind of bring yourself in a certain direction. And then you'll find you get stuck again and you can rinse and repeat. So, all right. Thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of your night, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.